Uh, Hello, everybody. Uh, this is Kudeep Jivani. I work in Guava Thales company. So I work as a data science researcher and an architect. So work in both the fields. So today we'll talk about the distributed AI ML and about the advanced analytics, how we can apply that using which appropriate architecture. So at a high level, we'll cover these agenda. So we'll talk about the machine learning basics, how things work. Then we'll talk about the distributed machine learning. What does it mean? How do we apply? And then we'll talk about the architecture of distributed ML. Then we'll talk about the existing platforms that we can use to do distributed ML. And then we'll talk about some strategies that we can use in our own domain, our industry, so that we can apply distributed ML to our problems. So let's start. So at a very basic level, machine learning, there are two standard things. One is training and the second is prediction. So we have our training data and we basically use that to run an algorithm and create a model. That model can then later be used for prediction and we can get basically new data from that, new predictions from that. So that's the simple way of doing machine learning. But we can formalize machine learning into three high-level characteristics. So first, I would say would be a feedback. Second, the purpose of ML. Third, the method of ML. So if we talk about feedback, we have like four high-level things. One is the supervised way, where we have a labeled data, which gives us the ground truth to train the model. Second is unsupervised method, where we don't have labeled data, but we have some similarity metrics, which can guide the data groups to form some kind of clusters. Then there is a middle way called the semi-supervised, where we have both the label information, some label information, and a similarity metric. So we'll use both of them to create an informed data or groups basically. Then we have a technique of reinforcement learning, where we have a reward-based cost function, which can take feedback from the data and can retrain based on the feedback. Like these are the four basic high-level techniques that we can have for machine learning. Then talking about purpose, the purpose could be one of the many things like anomaly detection, and then probably classification, regression, and some of the other stuff. So these could be many such things. But the important part is method. So if we talk about method, so method at the very high level is how we do machine learning. And at the core of ML, we have something called optimization. So optimization is the key thing for ML. We have a cost function behind every ML algorithm. Let's call that J theta. A simple example of a cost function could be, the simplest one could be the RMSE, or the root mean square loss, where we have a labeled data, let's say y hat, and the original data, let's say yi. So we can get the errors between them and compute it. As you can see on the right side, let's say we are fitting a red line amongst the blue points, basically, which is the best fit line we can find among these points. So the blue point is the actual data yi, and then the projection of that on the line is the yi hat. So the difference between them is the error. So square of that gives us one error point between one sample. We can do it for all the samples, and then the total summation and square root of that gives us the RMSE. This like one cost function we were trying to build. It's like a simple regression problem, or the simplest of the problems we can solve. But that gives an idea of what a cost function can do. It can have many forms, and so we'll explore some of the other ones also. So now I'll switch to another form of cost function, a probabilistic method. So that's called the expectation maximization. So these works on the likelihood of data, how likely the model fits the data. So example could be, let's say, to find the maximum likelihood, you could take example like GMM or K-means. These are examples of expectation maximization. GMM is a Gaussian mixture model. K-means is a well-known algorithm. Everybody knows about clustering. So that's pretty easy. So if we just quickly look at two steps of this EM, we'll get an idea. What does an EM do? So like in the E step, we do an expectation. So that's like finding the likelihood of point belonging to a cluster. So in terms of GMM, we'll find the probability of belonging to a cluster. In terms of k-means, we basically find the distance from the centroid. That's a simple thing that we do. In the M step, we will update the parameters. In case of GMM, we'll update quotient parameters. In case of k-means, we'll update the centroid. So as you can see, like in this diagram over here, so we had three clusters over here. So first we found the probability of a point belonging to a cluster. That was the E step. And then we updated all these parameters of the model and like the centroid and k-means, and we got our model. If you just look at that, GMF is just actually a general case of k-means. So like if phi c is 1 by k and sigma c is equal to 1, then probably we have a k-means. So that is like one way of doing optimization. Then there are other types, let's say called their genetic algorithms, where we learn iteratively based on evolution. So I'll not cover these more advanced techniques and specific techniques. I'll come to the most popular one, which everybody uses, which is the gradient-based optimization. So where the loss function is basically given to us in some form, could be RMSE, could be hinge, could be log loss, could be anything. We'll try to find the derivative of that function and find the gradient. So there are multiple ways in doing that. How do we find this? Depending on how we process data. So one is the batch method, where let's say theta is our parameter or the model, and neta is the learning rate, and this del is the gradient of this cost function. So we'll update the gradient and on the entire data, and let's say compute the new value of theta. That would be one iteration. This way we can do batch gradient descent on multiple iterations of data using entire data. Then we could do something like a mini batch gradient descent. We don't take entire data, but a chunk of that, like from I to I plus n. And again, we do multiple iterations and see how do we converge. And the most online form is the stochastic gradient descent. So we do per record. It's possible we take one xi, yi, and then update that in the model. As you can see on the right, different algorithms have different rate of convergence. Like SGD is the most erroneous one, basically. It moves randomly a lot because it has only looking at a single point of data. But eventually, it will also reach the minimum. Similarly, mini batch is slightly better, and batch SGD directly reaches the point because it has been looking at the entire data. So based on different types, we can have different ways of converging. So these are like general methods of doing how we do gradient-based optimization. So they cater to many algorithms. That's why we want to focus more on the gradient-based technique, because there are a wide variety of applications. So like first is like support vector machine, lossy regression, and many more models that probably you must have heard of. Then on the other side, we have the neural networks, the CNN, RN, SOM, GAN. All these are again variants of gradient descent. So since this is an important application and it's a very important operation technique, so we'll focus more of our talk of distributed ML on gradient-based techniques. So although we can cover other also, but we'll stick on gradient-based optimization, how we can do that in a distributed machine learning fashion. So, but what we are doing over here, we just have, let's say, a cost function j theta. So we want to find the minimum theta or the minimum parameter of that. Like in this image below, we have different algorithms. They work differently, but all are trying to reach the minimum. So this is, let's say, is the cost function j theta, and the minimum lies over here. Similarly, on a contour plane, this is where the minimum lies. So all these algorithms are basically trying to reach the minimum at different techniques. So the technique can vary. Like SGD goes per record directly. We can have multiple variants, momentum, NAG, these are all variants of SGD, but the idea remains same. We have to reach the minimum of the loss function or the cost function. And then that would be our model, the best fit model that we can get from data. So in this, our model is basically this cost function and the regularization. So this is what will be the model be, the choice of cost function and the choice of regularization we choose. Like the RMSE could be a choice. Then we can use, let's say, simple linear regularization. We could get, let's say, the elastic net or probably lasso, these kind of models. And then in this, the theta is our parameter. These are the model parameters we can tune and find what the model fits to, basically. And then we have the data. So we have three things: the model, parameters, and data. This is like was the general idea of machine learning, which probably we do more often. So now we want to explore the same thing in more of a distributed fashion. So how does this whole thing maps in a distributed way? So let's cover to the distributed machine learning topic. So I'll first talk about the need of distributed machine learning. So firstly, definitely, we have a massive data scale. So as data processing technology are getting more mature, data is available in abundance. As we know, we have lots of data lakes and we have all those things. So now it's getting easier. Data is readily available. So now with the also advent of IoT devices, so we have now a lot more data sources. So the data generating capacity is increasing. Like a general statistic was available, which said the Internet of Things that we have, there are like over 22 billion connected devices. So that's like a huge amount of devices generating large amount of data. Similarly, even the real-time streaming landscape is not just exploding with data. There are lots of data sources that's available, and now it's getting harder to crunch them to basically create cases of machine learning out of them. Just to give an example of how data is exploding, these are some of the statistics we can collect from normally internet. Let's say Wikipedia. It is like more than 50 million pages, and each page is like could have many words. This is like large amount of data we have just to be parsed and analyzed. Then Twitter generates 500 million tweets per day. That's again amazing amount of data. Similarly for Facebook, we are generating 4 petabytes of data per day. And you can't imagine in YouTube, people are uploading 500 hours of data per minute. So you can just imagine how much new data is coming in. These are just 4 channels, and there are many more channels. So as data is getting more faster, more voluminous, and more sources, we need to change the way we do ML. So that's why we need to move from the standard machine learning techniques to more of a distributed machine learning technique. So coming more on the niche part, there are another factors which also requires distributed ML. Like even the model sizes needs to be more large because the data is changing. So we need to somehow handle these large data. So with growing data sizes, the ML model has to capture the information data. So to capture the information, it has to create more structures, create more parameters, and basically find more relations. So for all that, the model also becomes complex and it becomes larger. So this also increases the size of data and need to somehow manage this large model sizes. And especially in neural networks, we can easily have like millions of parameters. So the problem is just ever increasing. There is no way, there's no turning back, and we have to address that in the most efficient way. And that's why there's also these frameworks and tools are coming up, which we're just going to talk about. So now we also have greater demand for machine learning. As you know, now ML is not just applied on servers, but on like mobile devices, computing devices, everywhere. So you could have, let's say, maybe like a case of a federated learning, where a larger model is stored on the cloud. It's collecting data from all the mobile devices, and then probably just looking at what the users reacted on some of the information. That thing is sent back to the cloud, and on the cloud, a bigger model is trained. It's more like a transfer learning that's happening. So the training is happening everywhere. So all devices, smaller or larger, are being part of this ML framework. So we need to now cater to all these kinds of demands and these different scenarios which are coming up now. So coming to the application area, where do you see distributed ML getting applied? So over a compute cluster, that's first use case. Let's say we have lots of machines and you want to utilize them to do machine learning. So there are 2 scenarios. One, we have basically high communication bandwidth scenario, where let's say we have GPUs on a single machine. We could have a GPU farm. So these are connected through, let's say, device bus. So as you know, we have like high interconnected bus inside these systems. So that's pretty high communication. And in those cases, the communication requirements change a lot. So because the interconnectivity between the bus is much higher. So that's one scenario. Another could be, we could have these servers or machines talking on, let's say, a LAN or network. So they may be having a lower communication bandwidth as compared to the other scenarios. So we need to cater to both of them. Then on the edge side, we want to also do prediction on the edge. So one was training on a cluster. Second is prediction on the edge. That's also an interesting area that is coming up a lot because we have these IoT devices. So you want to do some lightweight inferencing or prediction from models over the IoT devices. That's like another challenging problem we have. We need to solve via distributed ML. Then we also sometimes need to handle high-speed inferencing. These are cases where probably we need to respond back some answers in some SLA. Let's say, for example, a fraud detection model for a bank. So a new transaction comes into the bank, and there is a ML model which detects fraud from a transaction. Since this is an online system, so you need to, let's say, respond back in some 50 milliseconds. So this could be an SLA. So we need to ensure that this can turn things quickly, or the efficiency is pretty fast. And could also be possible that the same thing has to be done on multiple machines. Let's say for multiple banks, there could be a third-party vendor doing for multiple banks. So they need to take care of all these things: volume, speed, weight. So if we summarize all these things, what we see the challenge for distributed ML. So I would say there are like twofold challenges. It's not just an engineering problem; it's also a mathematical problem. So some part is mathematics, some part is engineering. Let's look at these things first. Let's look at the engineering challenges. So as you can see, at times we need machine learning at low footprint because let's say these IoT devices, they don't have too much of memory and they don't have too much power also, the compute power. So we need something like a low footprint and then a small execution program that can run on smaller devices like IoT devices and other similar small devices. So that's like one challenge to address. Second, we do machine learning at high speed. So let's say we have real-time streams or transactions or some automated closed-loop system that needs to respond data immediately. Then we need to do ML at high speed. Then we need to solve ML at high volume. This is the main case for which distributed ML was basically brought in because the volume was not being able to be addressed by a single machine. So that's where the need for distributed ML came in. So we'll focus mostly on this part more, how to handle high volume. And we will briefly cover the first two parts, as in how to do machine learning at low footprint and at high speed. So these three were the engineering challenges. Talking about the mathematical challenges. So it's not simply easy because as we know, machine learning is contextual. So the algorithm at times depends on some data assumptions also. So there is like some kind of coupling between data context and the algorithm. So we need to also ensure that if we are changing the technique, like the optimization we were talking about earlier, if the optimization is not distributed, so we need to ensure that those update equations now on multiple machines are all synchronized. Otherwise, they can just go wayward. They can diverge to different views, and ultimately, we will not be having a consistent view of the model. So that's where the problem of convergence comes in. So we need to ensure we reach either a global or at least local optimum. So ML algorithms cannot always ensure that we achieve a global optimum, but still we need to come to the most optimal local optima that's available. So we need to ensure that this convergence is possible. The distributed nature of the computing does not diverge from that. So that's another challenge we need to address. And then the distributivity of the ML model itself. Like all machine learning models cannot be distributed. Like for example, it's possible we could have a simple random forest. So it has multiple trees. We can easily train a tree on different machines. That's easy. But let's say we have a clustering problem. So if we, let's say, partition data into two clusters and run clustering separately on two machines, they'll come up with clusters on each of the machines, but they could be obtaining different clusters. That's possible because we could be partitioned at random. So at random, data could have partitioned, the close points could have been left apart in other partitions, so we could get different structures. But after those clusters, we can't merge them. That's a problem of geometry. So it's not easy to merge them. So that's the problem we can't solve. So that's what we need to also understand. Are all ML models distributable? So that's thing we need to figure out. And if not, can we make them more distributable? So that's like an algorithm change we also need to think about. So like even k-means by default was not distributed, but then we had another paper called k-means parallel that made it possible to distribute k-means. So similarly, we need to find those parallel versions of all these algorithms that are available to us. So now let's move to the first topic of these challenges. We're talking about machine learning at low footprint. So although you can see this is a demand more from the IoT landscape, where probably we want models which are basically small in sizes and doesn't consume too much of compute power. So although this looks like an engineering demand, but it's not an engineering problem. It's more like a machine learning problem. This is the mathematical part which needs to be changed over here. So as we know, these devices are constrained with memory sizes. So to enable prediction on an IoT device, we need a smaller model with lower footprint. So what we need to do, if we have, let's say, a normal model, a larger model that could be nonlinear model, we need to approximate the larger nonlinear model into group of smaller linear models. So as we know, linear models could be just an equation like y equal to mx plus c. That's a one simple regression model. So a simple set of parameters then could be just a list of float values, could be the model. That could be as small as that. We can have a linear model, and those could be easily loaded in an IoT device. And since just doing a prediction based linear model is pretty easy, just a dot product is good enough. So that's easily doable on an IoT device. So the idea is to how we can convert a larger nonlinear model to a smaller footprint model. We also have to ensure the accuracy. So that's why we chose our nonlinear model, because the accuracy was good. So we have to ensure that without compromising accuracy, we are able to convert them into linear models. We have to approximate, but we need to be as close to the original model as possible. So idea is we can take the data and project it to a lower dimensional manifold. So we can use, let's say, data projection. Let's say we have three-dimensional data, we project two dimensions. Or let's say we had some thousand dimensional data, we can project to, let's say, some 50 dimensional data. So that gives us a new space. So like in this example over here, we have, let's say, just a two-dimensional data. As you can see, this is like an XY plot. So the points, blue and the red points, are in two dimensions. So we can project them onto a one-dimensional line and then look at them. So this line over here, the inclined line, is a one-dimensional line. So this projection of blue is shown in blue as a histogram. The projection of red is shown over in red. So now we've converted a 2D data to a 1D data. That's the way of projection we can do. But what we need to ensure that we need to also able to create linear classifiers which are separable. So the way to do that is we have to find a projection that minimizes the within class covariance. So what we need to do is basically ensure that the projection is done in such a way that the points after projection are still easily separable. Like in this case, the earlier projection was not good for linear classifiers. So the classifier would have made a mistake and the accuracy would have gone down. But in this kind of projection, we would still have a good accuracy because it's ensuring the within class covariance is still minimized. So the 1D model will also be doing good enough. Similarly, we can generalize this from 2D to 1D to maybe any n dimension to a smaller n dimension. This is like one way of reducing the footprint. This was basically all based on the mathematical part. This was nothing to do with engineering. So like this problem was on the math side. But then we have other problems. Let's say talking about high speed. So this is definitely an engineering ball game that we have. So let's see what do we have over here. So majority of the computations in ML are basically just linear algebra calculations. So like basic transforms and vectors, matrices, doing dot product and taking sums and products. So these are like some basic things we do always in ML. So how we can make them faster? So the idea is do the same thing but at high speed. And so essentially, if you just focus on linear algebra and make linear algebra faster, I think we can do the job. So how we can achieve that? So we have something called in the high performance community, which basically has been doing research for large amount of years. And they have been working on these libraries which can do this math faster, and then they're converting into their libraries, machine libraries, which are now being incorporated in most of the popular ML libraries. So luckily, most of these current systems do already have them. So they are already incorporating them, but let's quickly discuss some of them. So one of the basic ones called the BLAS, that's the basic linear algebra subprogram. This is a very old library. This has been existed for more than 40 plus years. It was the first release was done in 1979, and it was initially designed for networking. So how people could do networking faster. So that was the basic idea of this, doing basic operations in a fast way. Then there were lots of software developed on top of that. This was basically first made in Fortran, then converted to other languages. So then software like LAPACK, NetLib, Breeze, and Scala. This is also used in, let's say, Spark MLlib. So these are all implementations of BLAS. They are already using that 40 years of research on making linear algebra faster. So that's available to us in these libraries. Then there is another technique called the LLVM-based JIT compiler. So LLVM is basically a representation technique where it's like a part of a compiler where we can do the JIT or just-in-time compilation. Like in Java, we have the JIT compiler that converts the byte code to machine code. Similarly, we can do in Python, we have something called a Numba that creates Python code to a number that's basically a C code. So essentially, we can convert our machine learning Python code into a very fast machine code like a C code. So that's the beauty of this. So we have these structured algorithms libraries. So like this number architecture, if you see, there is a NLVM library. That's a generic thing, and it can interface to multiple platforms and architectures. Like for example, it can work with Intel machines, AMD, NVIDIA, Apple, and then they can also work on simple, let's say, machines, and then also work on, let's say, the CUDA architecture or the GPUs. So the same code, your Python code, can easily be converted to, let's say, a hardware Intel specific machine code, optimized for Intel, optimized for AMD, by just doing a JIT compiling on the fly. And you can also do the same thing for GPUs. So for the developer, we just added a simple Python code, but that was converted to efficient machine code by these architectures. So we can utilize those things given a Python function and given to the Python library of LLVM. Let's just say the number interface for us, it will then generate a machine code that would be optimal. So the way this works, it takes an intermediate representation of the code from the compiler and then emits an optimized IR. So it creates something like a call flow graph, the CFG basically. Looks at the structure, which branch is calling which branch, what is the loop happening over there. Then it tries to inline some of them, tries to do branch predictions. There are multiple hardware techniques which can be utilized to basically make the code more efficient. But we can come to know of them only when we have this runtime code in implementation, because that's when it can look at, analyze the code behavior. It can look at multiple runs of the code and see how efficiently is this happening. And then based on that, you can make a decision that, yeah, this is probably the right way to achieve generate a code. So then we also have the dedicated hardware, GPUs, APUs, FPGA, and then we have some specific math kernel libraries like the Intel MKL, which can accelerate math functions like linear algebra, FFT, vector math. So all this is available to use. We can just simply plug those in and use it. Probably people would know that Intel MKL is already their versions of library. Like for example, in Python, we have NumPy. NumPy is the mathematical library to do computations, math computations. There is a version of NumPy that uses Intel MKL. So if you run that on Intel machines, the same NumPy calculations will run much faster. So these are like some implementations available. We can directly use those things. So then besides this, the HPC community also did some research and they requested the hardware vendors to generate some special hardware instructions for high performance. So they added something called FMA, or the fuse multiply add, where you can do both the multiply and add in a single cycle. So we combined with the technology of SIMD, the single instruction multiple data, we could do a floating point instruction like this in a single cycle. If you see, this is like A into X plus B is like loading A, loading X, loading B, and then probably multiplying A into X and adding B. All this thing could be just in just one single cycle because of the FMA and SIMD support. So these are some of the special things which the research community has added to the hardware so that we can efficiently use the mathematics more efficiently at the top layer. So like the Intel MKL and many more libraries utilize them. So the VLAS, and then formally we can use the higher library. So the hierarchy goes along. So this is just to give a view, all this is in place for us. Now let's talk about the main thing, the high volume case, the distributed machine learning. So initially, if you see, the normal model that we have is just, we have a cost function. On a single machine, it's taking the data and it's basically then trying to generate the model. If you talk this was the same thing in a distributed fashion, what will happen, we'll say, now we'll split the cost function into multiple parts. So let's say we're splitting on data. So we have one model, it's now been computed multiple data partitions, D1, D2, D3. So this is what's called as a data parallel way of doing things. So we have multiple machines, each working on part of data and generating a model. So this is a data parallel way. We could do another way. We could split on theta. So split the model and have the same data shared across all the partitions, all the machines basically. So this is called the model parallel way of doing things. These are like the two fundamental ways of doing distributed machine learning. And then we could also have a hybrid approach of these two. So that can take care of best of both the worlds. So we'll talk about these later. But talking at a high level on a very architectural level way, so we have four things to consider in distributed ML architecture. One is the machine learning part, as I told you all the things earlier, what do we need to take care about. Then the parallelism and the topology and communication. So as we discussed earlier, we have like the feedback purpose and method we need to think about first when talking about machine learning. The same goes for distributed ML. And parallelism, we just discussed about in the previous slide. We could do data parallel way, model parallel, or hybrid approach. So we have discussed about these two techniques previously. Now we'll talk about the rest two, the topology and the communication. So topology could be like centralized, decentralized, fully distributed. These are choices we have. How do we arrange the machines? How do they interconnect with each other? Then we have choice of communication. It's like a bulk synchronous communication, still synchronous and barrierless. These are like a few of the terms. We'll cover them just in the subsequent slides. So let's begin with the high level idea. So at the very high level idea, what we are doing is basically we have, as I told you earlier, we're talking about the gradient based optimization. So let's say we have the SGD, the stochastic gradient descent. We're going to parallelize that. So we have lots of machines available to us and data on those machines distributed across the cluster. So what we want to find is partial gradients from each of the machines, and somehow we aggregate all of these gradients and compute the final gradient, or that's basically the view of the entire data. So we want to apply this idea in different fashion. So we'll use different topology, different communication way, but the idea remains same. We have data distributed multiple machines, and we need to find the gradient somehow and aggregate them to get the final model. So let's begin with the first one. So for the topology part, first is we have the centralized system. That's like the master-slave system we have, where there is one master controller and there are multiple workers. So this is the case of the Spark and Hadoop that we have, the MapReduce pattern that we are very good familiar with, and this is how we can do. And where we have the one central machine which is coordinating all the workers. So let's say the workers have the data with them, and they have a copy of the model, and then they have the algorithm with them. So each of them are reading from their own data source and computing the gradient. They're sending the gradient update to the master machine. Each of them are sending gradients back to the master machine. Then the master machine aggregates all of them and then broadcasts the new updated version of the model back to these machines. So this is after the update is the broadcast. Now each of the workers again have the update model. They again do the next iteration and again basically update the grade. So this is like an iteration going on where they send the updates to the main master and they get the broadcasted version back. And this is like one way of doing things. And as we were talking earlier, this could be easily done for cases like ensemble classifiers, like for example, random forest. Random forest is an ensemble of trees. So we could have, let's say, each node training a tree, and then probably that tree becomes part of the ensemble. So ensemble is done over here. We could have other ways of doing ensemble like stack ensembling and other ensembling techniques, where the ensemble logic could be done at the master node and the individual models are trained at the workers. It's like one strategy. Talking about the other ones, the exactly opposite of that, the decentralized, fully distributed version is like the point-to-point peer network where we have all the workers. There is no master. Everybody talking to everybody. So all the workers have a partition of data. They have a copy of the model, a local copy basically, and they're sending updates to each of them. So they are reading, a data partition, and they're calculating the updates and then sending to the neighborhood network. So everybody has to ensure that they send updates to everyone and they receive updates from all the neighbors and update the local model. So this approach basically is more scalable and this avoids single point failure. So that's the advantage. But as you can see, it requires very high communication overhead because everybody's talking to everybody. So this is not generally useful, but only useful in case of high sparsity, where we have some low rank matrices and majority the matrix is sparse, the data is empty. So then the delta is very small. Then this could really be efficient. And some of the platforms that do this is like GraphLab. So the previous example, the one we had master slave was Spark. This is we can do in GraphLab. So then let's say we have another model, let's say the decentralized with parameter servers. So now this is like a middle approach where we have both the data parallelism, also the model parallelism. So each of the workers have a data view, they have a partition of data with them, and then there is a parameter server which have maintaining basically partitions of the model. So as you can see, each of the node is just the other parameter server side is just only updating one part of the model. So and each of these workers can independently talk to them. They can send their updates, get the updated model back. So this way they can work independently and also more efficiently. So this is like acts like a global shared memory for all of these workers. TensorFlow is based on this architecture. So this is the topology. So like we discussed 3 topologies. Now let's come to the communication part. So we'll quickly discuss about the main ideas around communication. So communication is the central theme for distributed ML because that's where the main strategy lies upon. And there's a direct implication on choice of ML method that we use. And let's say in case of NCT, so the communication delay has an important role to play in convergence. So larger the delay, the variance increases and the model gets more unstable and it gets hard to converge it. So that's why we would have two choices. Either we could be slow and safe, like the master slave architecture, or we could be fast and less accurate as per the asynchronous architecture. So we need to make a choice, or we can make a balance of these two. So in general, there is a trade-off between computation, communication, and accuracy. So accuracy increases more training data, that we already know. But if we use more data, we need to capture more information. So we'll have a larger model size. That is, we require high compute power for building large models over large data. And then, although we can parallelize and reduce the compute on by adding more machines, but then that will increase the communication cost. So as you can see, if you want to reduce the compute, you need to add more machines, but that will increase communication cost. So either way, there is no best option. It's like a balance. We need to find the right spot in between, which can be the most optimal way. So in this slide, let's talk about communication. The very first simple example, the MapReduce case that we have, that's implemented in Spark and Hadoop, is we have multiple workers. Each of them computes the gradient, we exchange the gradient and update parameters. This goes on basically per many batch per iteration. This is a simple model, as we know, and this could be easily implemented and in all the MLlib libraries that we have. But now let's discuss some variants of this simple model. It is called bulk synchronous because data is processed in a chunk, and there is probably a synchronization point. At this point, when the mini batch 1 closes, all the workers wait for this closure, then starts again. So again, this will goes on continuously. So in case we have a larger model, in that case, these intermediate steps, the exchange part will increase a lot. And this will keep on increasing as the size of model grows upon. And this will increase or decrease the efficiency of the machine learning training. So how we can solve them? There are multiple ways of solving it. We'll first talk about the very direct method without changing the architecture. That is, if we simply just only work on the exchange gradient part and don't touch anything else, the simple way is compression. So if we, there are algorithms called the QSGD that's based on the HDD quantization. So we just quantize the update, don't send the complete update. So for example, in this algorithm, they compress 32 n bits was the original data size. They convert to like 32 plus square root n log n. That was like a huge significance in reduction. So what they did is first they compressed the gradient, then that was exchanged and decompressed. So 2 extra cycles were added to it, compress and decompress. But that, if you can see, the same pipeline now shrunk to a large amount, and now the same model could run much faster. The iteration could run much faster. This was more like a compression technique. We just focus on the gradient part. But there could be more problems. So let's talk about the other problem. Let's say there could be non-uniform execution. That's possible because the data has different density, different distributions, and the algorithm could behave differently on different data. So some workers, let's say, finish quickly, some are slow, some are still struggling. So, but what would happen over here? Because we have these barriers over here, this is a bulk synchronous parallel technique, we have to synchronize all of them. So we will have synchronization delay. So let's say the first worker completed, but has to wait for all of others to complete because it can't proceed ahead until unless the barrier is revoked. So this is one of the problems with these techniques which we face in the MapReduce kind of paradigm. So to solve these, they are different and more complex architectures. So one of the most successful ones, we'll not talk about all of them, I'll just pick a couple of them so that we just get the idea. So one of the most successful one is called the stale synchronous parallel approach. It's called the SSP, where we allow the workers to run at their own pace without synchronization. But as you know, if we keep on doing that, it can go out of sync. So to balance between uncontrolled execution and out of synchronization, there is a constraint where basically the fastest and the slowest workers are not allowed to drift more than S iteration apart. That's called the staleness. So, and moreover, to manage this, workers operate on locally cached data. So, but that is until the staleness S expires. Like in this case, if we use a staleness threshold of S equal to 3, then probably in this case, you can see the worker 1 is proceeding very fast, but the worker 3 is the slowest one. So what will happen? At the 6th iteration, worker 1 will be stalled. It will not be allowed to proceed until worker 3 reaches iteration number 3. So over here, it's already in iteration number 2. The moment it reaches iteration 3, then probably the gap will again be of 3 iterations. Then it will, the first one will be allowed to proceed. So this is like kind of a balanced way, and it's more like a smarter way of how you can do both. Let the workers run at their own pace, and also ensure you don't go too out of sync. So this is one technique that's quite successful. Then there are other extremes where we have the total asynchronous mechanism. So let's say, for example, we had everybody has to do some task, all the threads. So they have to first complete task one, task two, task three in order. So in a bulk synchronous parallel mechanism, we'll probably have a barrier until unless everybody completes the step one, they'll not proceed to step two. Similarly for step three. But in case of asynchronous, they let run as they want. If there's a slow worker just working on one, let run on a stage one. Other are faster, let them go faster. So depending on their speed and capacity, they are just allowed to run on their own speed. So this was another extreme way. So now we did hear to a lot of these architectures, these theories, and these mechanisms. So let's see how we can actually use them. So I'll just talk about a few, or actually four platforms which can enable us to do distributed machine learning. So first one then is, as you know, the popular Apache Spark implementation, which implements the bulk synchronous parallel model, and it has a set of RDDs which are like distributed data sets, and then it also has like a DAG scheduler. So it has like one driver program and multiple worker nodes. So the RDD could be partitioned across multiple workers, and then there is a DAG scheduler which does a lazy execution. It optimizes the function flow and finds the most optimal way of doing things. So these are like very popular frameworks. I just mentioned them and move on to the next one. So that people can read them at their own leisure. So the other interesting one is GraphLab. So GraphLab implements the total asynchronous execution model. So where each of the if you node in the graph is actually a processing unit. So you can see each node is doing some processing. It's an independent machine that's possible that doing some function applying on data. So if we imagine the whole machine in kind of a graph, then we can define three high-level functions, what they call as a GAS, or the gather, apply, and scatter. So gather is basically accumulate data from all the neighbors, and then probably do some, let's say, aggregation or whatever. And then after that aggregation, apply it to itself, and then propagate to the neighbors. That's called the scatter. So first collect from the neighbors, do some aggregation, propagate back to the neighbors. That's basically the gather, apply, scatter model. So we can do this for any kind of machine learning model we want. We can design them in other choices. We have full control over here. So we can design the control flow, everything. This is like the most precise way we can do this asynchronous execution. Then we have the popular Google TensorFlow. It supports both synchronous and asynchronous execution mode. So it has techniques like auto differentiation, distributed computation. So it supports both data parallel and model parallel approaches. So it has different functions, C++, Python, different interfaces. It has their own analysis graph. It also computes a DAG. So that DAG is analyzed, and the most optimal execution strategy is then formulated. Then it chooses the CPU, GPU, or TPU, whichever is supported underneath, to create a plan and then actually run that code. So that's the execution model for TensorFlow. Then we have another interesting platform, which is less popular but highly efficient, is PATM, also called as PMLS, or the Parallel ML System. So they implement what we discussed in the last, the phase synchronous parallel approach, which basically allows both data to run as fast as they can and also control synchronization. So it's more like an ML tailored model that we can do. So the speed can be as close to the asynchronous method, and the correctness could be close to BSP, or the bulk synchronous parallel way. So it tries to balance both of them. The way it achieves it by using a key value store. It's like a distributed shared memory where all the parameters are like key values that's stored in that central server where everybody can access. So there are some APIs where we can pull data from that central server, update them, and then send back. So we can communicate via that distributed shared memory. So they have model parallel algorithms. They can also do structure-aware parallelization. That's basically they can optimize the flow that you see in the diagram on the right over here. They can analyze the code structure, the dynamic block structure, and create a new basically mechanism, regroup the operations in a way that is more optimal. So they have these architecture where there are multiple workers. So there are two parts of it. One is just the parameter exchange, second is scheduling channel. So they have a scheduler. So that scheduler is basically analyzing the model structure and finds the best execution order and how to schedule the workers. Then they also do things like prioritize smaller updates for larger ones. So that's like all automation they can do. So the scheduler is very important. The scheduler schedules the workers at different times. It can, let's say, have a slow worker and a fast worker. It can then be prioritized, give some other tasks to the faster worker, and things like these. So like these were the four kind of systems that are already in place, but these are like functionality is fixed for them. They are probably providing what they have supported. But for a general thing, I would say we would have to design something for ourselves because every industry has a different problem to solve, and it may not fit in any of the exactly one of the platforms that we have. So mostly what we require is to have an open kind of view. So where we basically can optimize it and basically plug and play multiple things. So what we recommend is using like a hybrid architecture. You could have multiple data sources like IoT devices, data coming from them, from real-time streams, from big data. So what we do is like have a central layer that is like unified processing framework. It could be any framework. Could be big data, Intel framework, could be Spark, could be TensorFlow, could be the probabilistic programming techniques, could be anything. Then there could be a layer that takes care of basically how the actual machines interact. Do we have a Spark worker there, maybe a Dask, a Tensor worker? Could we have a GPU? So we could have multiple ways. So in short, we could make some kind of accelerators out of these combinations and create an app on top of that. So the idea is if we can keep them loose and have an architecture that is loosely coupled and we can add multiple things, that would be the best strategy because none of the platform is complete in itself. Everybody is good in some part, but not the other. But in a real world scenario, we have to solve a real problem. And that real problem could be complex. It could be exploring multiple areas, which cannot be covered by a single platform or a single tool. So we need a mix of that. So as a industry architect, I would say we need to have all of these available. We should have an open strategy where we can easily plug and play any of them. Just to give an example of this hybrid architecture, I'll pick a simple example. Let's say we have a standard Spark architecture. So we have a Spark driver over there that controls the entire Spark context. We have a RDD distributed across multiple machines. Then we have the JVMs of the worker nodes, which are working on the RDD partition and then doing these distributed processing. It's also possible we can extend the driver program by adding some Java code, but some Python code, some C++ code. So we can extend all of these by adding more technologies to the same stack. So let's say in the Spark, each of the workers is along with execution some Java code, it can also execute this is some Python code and also implement number. As you remember earlier, we discussed some of these interesting properties of number. It could do a JIT compilation and convert Python to C. So we could have a fast C++ code running via Python also. Similarly, we can utilize some C++ techniques directly. So all this could be done maybe let's say via a pipe or whatever, and we could do this control. But we need flexibility. So people may be recalling that this we could do this via PySpark also. But PySpark, the main thing is the control remains with Python. So you need to do scheduling or execution via that Python controller. So that's where the main thing is. If you need to, let's say, add a new Java library, as you know that most of these libraries are already well defined. So we need to somehow directly use them instead of reinventing the wheel. So we want to use all the C++ code, the Java code that we have, but in with the Python controller, it's hard to do that. Although some people can argue that there are some smart technology like Py4j where you can invoke Java jar files from Python, but that's a complex thing. In general, average developer can't do that. So we need some kind of a mechanism, let's say, where we can execute all of them, add all of these interesting other architectures and try to combine them and extend the existing one to basically do the thing we want. So this like one picture, we could have many, many pictures with many base platforms and extension of that we can implement. This was like the total picture I wanted to paint. And I would say distributed ML is a complex thing. It's not just engineering. It's actually also a mixture of mathematics and engineering. Luckily, we got a chance to work on both the sides. We were also working as data science researchers and also as an architect. So we could combine both of things and work on these things. So just before closing, I'll just say one last word that for distributed ML, we just learn, unlearn a few things, and relearn again. So that's the way to do distributed ML, and that's it. Thank you very much. So I'll now open it for questions if anybody has one. So I can see a few questions on the chat. So let me pick the first one. Okay. How can we implement these distributed methods in practice? What kind of skills are needed? And yeah, that's a very good question. I think that's what probably I was trying to say in the end, that we need to start with the base model. So I would say everybody understands their industry well. So they know what's the business problem they're solving, what tools they can implement, what the data that they have. So I would recommend start with the base model, and then it we could implement those things, maybe add on to probably more such tools that we require, and make evolve with time. So out of, let's say, these four distributed systems, they're already hardened, they're production ready. Start with them, keep on adding on them. So that's one way of doing things. So because next question, centralized system. I think centralized more of the way we do in MapReduce, like the Spark. That's like centralized system where we master the architecture. So we have one master and a slave. In federated learning, we have like both the processing happening at cloud also and it's happening at device also. So it's not totally master slave. So federated learning would not necessarily be a centralized system. Federated learning would mostly be a decentralized kind of system where we are doing some part processing on the device and some on probably the cloud part. That way. Now taking on the next question that we have, how does the AI/ML architecture without analytics could make and don't benefit the startup company? So I would say, as for a startup, it's very necessary that we first do something that is novel. So for implementing such architecture, we should start with open source. So I would say pick an open source software and then try to build those things on top of that. So like all the things we talked about, like Spark, Patum, and probably the other tools, they are mostly open source. And we could easily pick those things and try to, because that says no cost required over there, and try to add our logic on top of that. So for a startup, I would recommend using open source totally and try to make something that is meaningful. So coming to the next question. So talking about 100 terabyte data in a distributed fashion and training, definitely, yeah. So as I was telling you, the choice of training is not just data. So that's possible that we have 100 terabyte of data, but it's also what kind of model you want to build. Let's say I give an example. I have 100 TBs of data, and let's say I have 10 machines. I can easily have, let's say, 10 GB of data on one machine. The machines are strong enough, so that's possible. I can have multiple machines. But if the model is something like, let's say, the random forest, so I can train a tree on each of the model independently. That's pretty easy. So I could manage a tree on one machine and then have an ensemble of them. So that's possible. But if we have a complex model, maybe something like that's more complex, something like clustering or some other information that we have. So they may not be that distributable. So I would say data and model, let's think of both of them. Distributed easy. We can have the distributed file systems, then we have these architectures which can work on partition of data. So I would recommend pick up these distributed platforms and try to use them and pick basically models that fits on that. So I guess, so talking about books, I think there are lots of good books on distributed ML. So it's actually a new topic. So there is no dedicated, I would say, book. It would be a bunch of things. So because as you can see, it's evolving. It's mostly a research area. So I did not cover the more deeper research part, like the scale synchronous parallel. It gets more complex beneath it. So the observation techniques get more complex. So they're mostly in research papers. So I would say generally read some good articles on say, Medium and other stuff. These are really helpful. So that we can get this information as quickly as possible and implement those things. Yeah. So privacy issues definitely, yeah, that's part of the distributed ML architecture. So to handle that, that's where the technique like the federated learning comes in. So in federated learning, you can have the data present at the edge device. So in that case, we are not transferring data. So that's the interesting part of federated learning architecture, that the computation or the data transformation done at the device itself, and just the updates, let's say the model updates sent to the cloud server. So this way, the privacy was ensured. The data remained at the device of the user. Only the model was updated on that. Or the update was calculated on the device, and the update was sent back to the cloud server. So this was basically the whole thing worked in tandem with privacy as well as the machine learning aspect of that. So, okay. So we have another question. If you have lots of updates in data, Hadoop works best, but there is no update in data. So I guess, yeah, when we have a batch training and we have a distributed data, so that's easy. Yeah. So we have an HDFS file system, but when we have an updating data, as Reddy said, then probably streams is the way we need to consume. So we need to have something like an online learning model that we call that as continuous learning. So we start with the batch data, we make a model, but we can update the model with increments. So we can have, let's say, a stream connected to that, new updates are coming in. So with new updates, we can improve the models online. So that's so I would say for a distributed way, prepare a model from the big, large amount of data over, let's say, using Hadoop, Spark, these big data infrastructure. And after the model is available, now using the online algorithms, this also depends on the model. Yeah, it's not available for all these types of models, but for some of them we can do. So for the models which have the capacity to do online version, we should then update on a streaming fashion. And so we can have basically both of them, big data training and online update over a stream. So I guess, yeah, we are done with all the questions. If there's anything else, let me know. Okay, that's it then. Thank you guys. Thank you for listening patiently. Bye bye.